The great hall of Ashthorn Keep fell into a heavy, breathless silence as the grand doors swung open. Lyra Ashthorn stepped forward on her own, barefoot across the cold black marble, silver chains dragging behind her like the ghosts of 17 forgotten years. She did not wait to be dragged. She walked with her head high, storm-grey eyes sweeping across the assembled nobles and alphas without flinching. The torn grey exile robes clung to her body, stained by mountain wind and old blood. The moon silver brand on her left shoulder burned beneath the fabric, a constant reminder of the night she was meant to die. Regent King Thorn Ashthorn sat upon the obsidian throne, his fingers tightening almost imperceptibly on the carved armrest. His face remained carefully composed, but Lyra saw the flicker of something darker in his eyes, fear. Not of an army at the border, fear of what she might remember. "You dare return," Thorn said, his voice smooth yet edged with ice. "After 17 years of silence, you bring dragons to our gates and claim the throne as your birthright. Tell me, sister, did the wilds drive you mad, or have you simply come to finish what your traitorous blood started?" The court did not erupt in laughter. Instead, a tense, fractured silence spread through the hall. Some nobles shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between brother and sister. Others, the older ones who still remembered the night of the coup, watched with thinly veiled dread. Factions had already begun to form in the shadows. Lyra stopped at the center of the marble floor and lifted her chained wrists slightly, the silver biting deeper into her skin. Blood welled, warm and slow. "I did not come to beg for forgiveness, Thorn," she said, voice clear and sharp enough to cut through the silence. "I came because this throne was never yours to steal. You dragged me into the snow that night and left me to die. But I lived, and I remember more than you would like." Thorn's jaw tightened. For a fraction of a second, raw panic flashed behind his calculated mask. He knew exactly what she might remember: the true circumstances of their parents' death, the poison, the betrayal that had secured his regency. "Enough," he commanded, rising from the throne. "The court has gathered to witness justice. You stand accused of treason and forbidden alliances with beasts. The priests will perform the execution rite. Let the moon goddess judge whether your blood deserves to remain in this kingdom." The priests stepped forward with glowing silver wards and ceremonial blades. As the first blade rose toward her branded shoulder, Lyra drew a slow, deliberate breath. She would not go quietly. Deep inside her chest, something vast stirred, scales scraping against fur, fire roaring through moonlight. The shadow at her feet rippled violently. A searing pain exploded through her veins, as though her blood itself was turning to molten glass. Horrific flashes tore through her mind. Her mother's scream, her father's dying eyes, Thorn's small, cruel smile as he pressed the burning brand into her 8-year-old shoulder, while snow fell around them like ash. Lyra gasped, knees nearly buckling. The pain was the price of remembering. The shadow at her feet tore open slightly, a crack of silver-gold light spilling forth as something ancient and powerful pressed against the veil, desperate to protect her. The priest's blade hovered inches from her skin. The entire court held its breath, divided between fear of what she represented and fear of what Thorn would do if they showed weakness. And high above the storm-dark skies of Ashthorn Keep, a single massive shadow circled, silently, wings cutting through the clouds, eyes glowing with ancient, unwavering loyalty. Waiting for the moment it had been promised 17 years ago, the grand doors exploded inward with a crash that shook the ancient banners. King Draven Voss entered the hall like a storm-given form. Black armor edged in dragon scales drank the torchlight, and his dark fur mantle stirred as though alive. His golden crimson eyes found Lyra instantly, and the air between them ignited. The shadow at her feet detonated. It surged upward in a violent spiral of silver-black smoke, tearing at the silver chains binding her wrists. Lyra gasped sharply as white-hot pain lanced through her veins. The moon-silver brand on her shoulder flared like molten metal. Her knees buckled, but she forced herself to remain upright, teeth clenched against the agony. The shadow did not obey her, it reached for him. Draven stopped 10 paces away. His jaw tightened, one gloved hand curling into a fist so hard the leather creaked. Inside his chest, the cursed dragon fire, the same fire that had kept him alive for centuries, flickered dangerously, threatening to gut her out completely. Every step closer to her fed the bond and drained him at the same time. Thorn rose slowly from the obsidian throne, a cold smile curving his lips. "King Draven," he said smoothly, voice laced with poisoned courtesy. "How gracious of you to interrupt a family matter. One might almost think you have a personal stake in the survival of a girl the kingdom buried 17 years ago." Draven did not answer. His gaze remained locked on Lyra, drinking in the blood on her wrists, the defiance burning in her storm-grey eyes, and the way the shadow twisted and strained toward him like a living chain. Lyra lifted her chin despite the pain ripping through her body. The shadow surged again, pressing against the silver wards until they hissed and smoked. She met Draven's eyes with brutal honesty and quiet challenge. "You left me alive once," she said, voice low but carrying through the deathly silent hall. "Will you watch them finish what they started?" A muscle jumped in Draven's jaw. The dragon soul inside him roared, slamming against the walls of the curse that bound it. He took one more step forward. The shadow responded instantly, wrapping around Lyra's chained wrists, as if trying to tear the metal apart. Fresh pain exploded behind her eyes, memories of snow, fire, and a small girl's scream as dragons roared overhead. Thorn's smile sharpened. He gestured to the priests and alphas watching with rapt, fearful attention. "See how the beasts answer her call? This is the danger I warned the council about. The girl does not return for peace. She returns with forbidden power and a dragon king at her back, ready to burn our kingdom to ash so she may sit upon a throne stained with our parents' blood." Several alphas shifted uneasily. The divide in the court deepened with every word. Draven's voice, when it finally came, was rough and dangerous. "Release her." 2 simple words, heavy with command. Thorn laughed softly, though his eyes remained cold. "And if I refuse? Will you burn this hall with your dragons while the court watches? Will you openly declare war for a girl whose very existence threatens everything we built after our parents' unfortunate end?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Lyra felt the shadow clawing harder at her control, desperate to break free. Her vision blurred from the pain, but she refused to look away from Draven. In his golden eyes, she saw the same war she felt inside herself, centuries of guarded solitude, cracking against the pull of something neither of them had chosen. Draven's hand moved to the hilt of his sword. Not to draw it, not yet. But the dragon fire in his veins burned hotter and colder at the same time, the curse feeding on the growing bond like a parasite. He looked at Lyra, again really looked, and for one fractured second, the mask of the feared Dragon King slipped. What remained was raw, tormented hunger and a promise made in blood and snow 17 years ago. Thorn stepped closer to the edge of the dais, pressing his advantage. "Choose wisely, Dragon King. The court is watching. Will you sacrifice your precious fire for her?" The shadow at Lyra's feet tore wider. A low, ancient roar echoed faintly from the storm outside the keep, and the silver chains around her wrists began to glow white-hot, trembling on the edge of shattering. The silver chains around Lyra's wrists glowed brighter, vibrating with barely contained power. The shadow at her feet thrashed like a living storm, clawing at the air between her and Draven. Pain lanced through her bones, but she locked her jaw and forced her spine straight, refusing to give the court the satisfaction of seeing her break. Draven stood like a blade drawn in the firelight, every line of his body coiled with lethal tension. The dragon fire inside him raged against the curse, each pulse toward Lyra draining more of the ancient flame that sustained him. His golden crimson eyes never left hers. In them she saw the brutal war he waged, fascination warring with self-preservation, protection warring with the fear of what touching her would cost him. Thorn watched them both with the sharp eyes of a predator who had just scented blood. "Remarkable," the regent said softly, descending another step from the dais. "The Dragon King himself trembles at the sight of a girl in chains. Tell me, Draven, does she remind you of the child you stole from our mountains all those years ago? Or is this something more personal?" Draven's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword until the leather groaned. He took one deliberate step closer to Lyra. The shadow surged violently in response, wrapping around her body like protective wings made of smoke and starlight. A fresh wave of agony tore through her, forcing a low, involuntary sound from her throat. Yet she did not retreat. Instead, she lifted her chained hands and pressed them against the shadow, trying to calm the storm that threatened to rip free. "Do not speak of things you do not understand," Draven growled, voice low and dangerous. His gaze flicked to the blood on her wrists, then back to her face. Something raw and possessive flashed across his features before he buried it. Lyra met his eyes with quiet fire. The pain had sharpened her voice rather than broken it. "If you came to watch me die, Dragon King," she said, each word measured and cutting, "then do it quickly. I have spent 17 years surviving what my own blood tried to end. I will not beg for mercy from either of you." The court remained deathly still. Several alphas had half risen from their seats, caught between loyalty to Thorn and the ancient instinct that made their wolves want to bow before the power stirring in Lyra's shadow. Draven stepped even closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his armor. The shadow reacted instantly, pressing against his chest as though trying to push him away and pull him closer at the same time. Draven inhaled sharply. For a moment his golden eyes flickered with visible pain, the curse feeding hungrily on the growing connection. "You were never meant to return like this," he said, so quietly only she could hear. "Not with this much power burning through you. Not when every moment near you costs me more than you know." Lyra's breath caught. She saw it then, the faint dimming of the fire that once burned so brightly behind his eyes. The cost he was already paying just by standing this close. Yet she did not soften. "Then leave," she whispered back, defiance and something deeper warring in her storm-grey eyes. "Or stay and watch what they made me become." Thorn's voice sliced through the charged silence like a whip. "Enough of this theater. Guards reinforce the wards. If the Dragon King wishes to protect a traitor, let him explain himself to the council when her power consumes us all." He gestured sharply, and the priests began chanting, strengthening the silver barriers around Lyra. The shadow screamed against the pressure, forcing another spike of pain through her body. Draven's hand shot out before he could stop himself. His fingers hovered just above her chained wrist, trembling with the effort not to touch her. The shadow calmed slightly at his nearness, but the curse in his blood roared in protest. The hall held its breath. In that suspended moment, moonlight streaming through the high windows bent unnaturally toward Lyra, tracing faint patterns of scales and wings across her skin. Ancient runes hidden beneath centuries of dust on the marble floor began to glow with silver-gold light. Draven's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper meant only for her. "If I break those chains now, there will be no going back." Lyra held his gaze, blood on her wrists, fire in her blood, and centuries of unspoken promise hanging between them. "Then break them." The shadow tore wider, and somewhere far beyond the walls, the dragons answered with a roar that shook the mountain itself. Moonlight fractured inside the great hall. It no longer fell evenly through the high arched windows. Instead it bent, drawn toward Lyra like iron filings to a magnet. Silver-gold threads of light traced across her skin, following the faint pattern of scales that had begun to shimmer beneath the surface. The shadow at her feet no longer waited, it moved with purpose, coiling up her legs and wrapping around her waist as though the dragon trapped within it refused to be caged any longer. Pain followed every pulse. It burned through her blood like liquid starfire, forcing her breath to come in sharp, controlled bursts. Yet Lyra remained standing, chained wrists held before her, eyes locked on Draven with unyielding focus. The silver chains vibrated violently now, the runes etched into them glowing white-hot as they fought against the awakening power. Draven stood only a few paces away, his massive frame rigid. The dragon fire in his chest flickered erratically, each surge toward her stealing more of his strength. His golden crimson eyes darkened with a mixture of raw hunger and self-loathing. He could feel the curse tightening around his heart like invisible claws, the price for allowing even this fragile connection. The court watched in stunned silence. Wolves among the alphas shifted restlessly, their beasts whimpering and lowering their heads despite their master's commands. Ancient runes carved into the marble floor, long forgotten beneath layers of dust and royal arrogance, began to glow one by one, tracing the shape of wings and crescent moons intertwined. Thorn's composure cracked further. He gestured sharply to the priests. "Strengthen the wards! Do not let her corruption spread!" The chanting grew louder, more desperate. Silver wards flared around Lyra, pressing down like a vice. The shadow hissed in fury, slamming against the barriers and sending fresh agony ripping through her body. For a moment her vision went white. She tasted blood on her tongue. Still, she did not fall. Instead, Lyra lifted her chained hands and pressed her palms against the shadow. A low, resonant sound escaped her throat. Not quite a growl, not quite a dragon's rumble, but something between them. The shadow calmed slightly, then surged again, this time reaching toward Draven. Draven's hand twitched. He took another step closer, ignoring Thorn's sharp command to stay back. The moment he entered the outer edge of the silver wards, the shadow lashed out and wrapped around his forearm. Not in attack, in recognition. Draven's breath hitched. Pain flashed across his face as the curse fed viciously on the contact, but he did not pull away. His golden eyes met Lyra's, and for the first time she saw the depth of his torment. The man who had saved her as a child now paying in fire for every second he stood near the woman she had become. "You feel it too," she whispered, voice hoarse from pain but steady. "The thing they tried to kill in me. It knows you." Draven's jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jump. His free hand rose slowly, hovering near her face without touching. The shadow between them thickened, forming the faint outline of a dragon's wing that shielded them both from the watching court. Thorn's voice rang out, cold and calculated. "You see now, she does not come alone. She brings the old corruption back into our halls. If we do not end this tonight, the dragons will not stop at our borders. They will burn this kingdom from within." Several alphas rose, hands on their weapons, caught between fear of Lyra's power and fear of defying the Dragon King. The divide in the court had become a chasm. Lyra felt the pressure building inside her, the hybrid blood demanding release. Scales flickered briefly across her arms before vanishing. Her exile brand burned hotter, no longer just a mark of shame but a seal struggling to contain something far greater. Draven's fingers finally brushed her cheek, the lightest touch, barely there, yet it was enough. The shadow exploded outward in a controlled burst, shattering the nearest silver wards and sending priests stumbling backward. Lyra cried out as the pain peaked. But beneath it came something else, a rush of raw power, ancient and familiar, like coming home after centuries of exile. Draven caught her as she swayed, his arm wrapping around her waist before he could stop himself. The curse screamed inside him, dragonfire dimming further, but his grip remained steady. Protective, possessive. Their eyes met again in the chaos of glowing runes and terrified wolves. And in that moment, The bond that had begun in blood and snow 17 years ago refused to be denied any longer. From the mountains beyond the keep, the distant roar of dragons answered closer now, much closer. The signs could no longer be ignored. The moment Draven's arm closed around Lyra's waist, the hall erupted into calculated chaos. Thorn seized the opening like a wolf, closing its jaws on a wounded prey. He raised his voice, sharp and commanding, cutting through the murmurs and the low growls of uneasy alphas. "See how easily she ensnares him," he declared, stepping fully down from the dais. The Dragon King, feared across the northern peaks, reduced to a guardian of forbidden blood. This is no mere return of a lost princess. This is an invasion wearing the face of kinship. The silver wards, though cracked, flared back to life under the priest's renewed chanting. Lyra felt them tighten like a noose around her awakening power. The shadow recoiled violently, slamming back into her body and sending a fresh wave of searing pain through her bones. She staggered against Draven's chest, but her fingers dug into his armor, refusing to show weakness. Draven's grip tightened protectively. His golden eyes burned with barely restrained fury. Yet the curse was already exacting its toll, faint lines of strain etched deeper around his mouth, the fire in his veins flickering dangerously low. Thorn smiled with cold triumph. "The Council has long warned of this. The girl was not simply abandoned, she was exiled for a reason. Her survival in the Dragonlands proves she carries corrupted blood. If we allow this bond to strengthen, she will turn our own wolves against us and open the gates to the dragon hordes." He gestured sharply. A dozen elite guards moved forward, silver spears leveled. At the same time, the older alphas who had long benefited from Thorn's rule began to close ranks, their expressions hardening with fear and self-interest. Lyra lifted her head, storm-grey eyes blazing despite the pain tearing through her. "You speak of corruption, brother," she said, voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Yet it was your hand that pressed the brand into my shoulder while our parents lay dying. Tell the court the truth. Did they die by traitors or by your ambition?" A ripple of shock moved through the hall. Several nobles exchanged uneasy glances. The seed of doubt had been planted. Thorn's expression darkened. "She twists history to suit her lies. Guards take her to the ritual chamber. We will perform the severing tonight. If her blood truly carries dragon corruption, the rite will burn it out of her. If she resists, then the court will see her for the monster she has become." Draven stepped forward, positioning his body between Lyra and the advancing guards. His voice was low, lethal. "Touch her and I will reduce this hall to ash." The threat hung heavy in the air. But Thorn had prepared for this. He turned to the assembled alphas, his tone shifting to one of pained reason. "My lords, you see the choice before us. Will we allow a foreign king to dictate the fate of our bloodline, or will we stand for the stability of the Ashthorn throne? King Draven may threaten war, but the real war has already begun inside these walls brought by the girl who should have died in the snow." Several alphas nodded grimly. The pressure on Draven mounted visibly. His dragonfire was fading faster now, the curse feeding on his growing protectiveness. Lyra could feel it through the shadow that still clung to both of them, the slow dying of something ancient and powerful inside him. She looked up at him, understanding the impossible position he was in. Her voice dropped, meant only for him. "Do not burn your kingdom for me." "Not yet." Draven's jaw clenched. His hand remained on her waist, possessive and conflicted, but he did not move to break the chains. The guards closed in. Silver nets laced with suppression runes were unfurled. Lyra felt the shadow inside her scream in protest, pushing against her control until blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. The hybrid power wolf and dragon fighting for dominance threatened to tear her apart before it could fully awaken. Thorn watched with cold satisfaction as they began to drag her toward the side doors leading to the ritual chamber. "Choose, Dragon King," he called out. "Your fire Or hers? Draven's eyes met Lyra's one final time. The raw torment in them was unmistakable. The man who had once saved a child, now forced to watch her be taken again, knowing any open move would cost him everything he had built. The shadow gave one last violent surge, then retreated deep inside her, leaving her drained and trembling. As the heavy doors to the ritual chamber closed behind them, Lyra felt the bond stretch painfully across the distance. And in the great hall, Draven stood motionless, the weight of his choice crushing the last embers of his dragon fire. The betrayal was complete. The ritual chamber deep beneath Ashthorn Keep was a tomb of silver and black stone. Ancient suppression runes covered every wall, pulsing with cold light designed to crush forbidden magic. Lyra was forced to her knees in the center of a carved circle, fresh silver chains wrapped around her wrists and ankles, anchored deep into the floor. The moon-silver brand on her shoulder burned like a living coal. Thorn stood at the edge of the circle, flanked by his most loyal priests and 3 alphas who had thrown their support behind him. Draven had been barred from entering. She could feel him through the bond, a storm of restrained fury and fading fire just beyond the heavy doors. Thorn stepped forward, voice smooth and final. The severing will begin. If the dragon corruption in your blood cannot be burned away, then you will die here, sister. The kingdom will remember you only as the traitor who tried to return from the grave. Lyra lifted her head. Sweat and blood streaked her face, but her storm-grey eyes remained unbroken. "You have always been afraid of what I might become," she said quietly. "Because you know the truth. You killed them. And I remember every second." Thorn's mask slipped for a heartbeat. He nodded to the head priest. The rite began. Chanting filled the chamber. Silver light poured down from the ceiling like frozen lightning, pressing into her skin, seeking the hybrid blood that should not exist. The shadow inside her howled in agony. Lyra's body arched as pain, unlike anything she had ever endured, tore through her wolf and dragon, fighting for survival within the same fragile form. Then something inside her snapped. The shadow exploded outward with a force that shattered the nearest suppression runes. Black silver energy erupted from her body, tearing the chains apart as though they were made of paper. Lyra cried out as her form began to shift, violently, bones cracking and reforming, scales rippling across her arms and shoulders while moonlight silver fur spread across her back. Her eyes burned with dual fire, wolf, storm, and dragon gold. She rose from her knees, no longer fully human. A majestic hybrid form stood in the center of the broken circle, tall, powerful, with sleek black-silver scales covering parts of her body, wolf-like ears and claws, and vast draconic wings half unfurled behind her. The exile brand on her shoulder had transformed into a glowing crown of intertwined moon and dragon fire. The priests stumbled backward in terror. Thorn's face drained of all color. Impossible. The hybrid blood was a myth, a forbidden abomination. The heavy doors to the chamber exploded inward. Draven stormed through, his golden eyes blazing as he took in the sight of Lyra in her true form. For one suspended moment, the feared Dragon King looked at her with something close to reverence and raw, devastating recognition. The shadow that had lived inside Lyra fully manifested behind her. A massive spectral dragon with wings that spanned the chamber, eyes identical to Draven's own. It lowered its great head protectively over Lyra, then turned and roared at Thorn. The sound shook the foundations of the keep. Alphas who had followed Thorn dropped to their knees, wolves submitting instinctively to the ancient hybrid power. The priests fell silent, their silver wards crumbling into dust. Lyra stepped forward, wings half spread, voice resonating with both wolf growl and dragon resonance. "I am Lyra Ashthorn, true heir of this throne. Abandoned, branded, left for dead. But the dragons did not let me perish. They raised what you tried to destroy." She looked directly at Thorn, her hybrid eyes burning with 17 years of pain and survival. And they taught me the truth of that night. Draven moved to stand beside her, his hand brushing her scaled shoulder, a deliberate, public claim. The curse in his blood screamed in protest, but he did not pull away. His dragon fire dimmed further, yet his voice remained steady and lethal as he addressed the stunned court that had poured in behind him. The forgotten princess has returned, not as a beggar, not as a traitor, but as the one who carries both bloodlines, the true Queen of Ashthorn. Thorn staggered back, face twisted in disbelief and fury. The entire court watched as the hybrid queen stood tall in the ruins of the Severing Circle, her spectral dragon roaring above her, and the Dragon King choosing her side in front of everyone. The public reversal had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The ritual chamber descended into utter pandemonium. Alphas shouted over one another. Some drew weapons while others dropped to their knees, wolves howling in submission to the hybrid queen standing before them. The spectral dragon above Lyra roared again, its wings brushing the ceiling and sending ancient dust cascading down like falling stars. Silver runes on the walls cracked and shattered one by one, unable to withstand the awakening power. Thorn backed away from the broken circle, his face a mask of barely contained rage and terror. "This is blasphemy," he roared, voice rising above the chaos. "She is no princess. She is an abomination, a hybrid creature bred by dragons to destroy our bloodline. If we do not end her now, she will burn every pack under the moon." Several loyal alphas rallied to him, silver blades glinting in the fractured moonlight. They surged forward, driven by fear of the unknown and years of loyalty to Thorn's iron rule. Others hesitated, caught between ancient instinct and political survival, their wolves whining and circling restlessly. Lyra stood tall in her hybrid form, scales and fur gleaming under the broken light. The pain of the forced transformation still burned through her body, but she held it under tight control. Her storm-grey eyes, now flecked with dragon gold, swept across the chamber with quiet authority. She did not roar. She did not threaten. She simply existed, and that alone was enough to fracture the court. Draven remained at her side, one hand still resting on her scaled shoulder. The curse inside him was devouring his dragon fire at an alarming rate. Yet he refused to step back. His golden crimson eyes burned with lethal promise as he faced the advancing guards. "Any man who raises a blade against her will answer to me," he said, voice low and deadly, "and I promise the flames will be slow." Thorn laughed bitterly, though sweat beaded on his brow. "You would risk everything, your army, your fire, your kingdom for this thing. She is not your mate, Dragon King. She is a weapon forged in the mountains to unmake us all." The words struck deeper than Thorn knew. Draven's jaw tightened as another wave of the curse tore through him, the dragon fire dimming visibly behind his eyes. Yet his grip on Lyra's shoulder only tightened, protective and possessive. Lyra felt the toll it was taking on him through their fragile bond. She turned her head slightly, voice low enough for only him to hear. "You do not have to burn for me." Draven's answer was a growl. "I already am." Chaos deepened. Some nobles fled toward the exits while others pressed forward, shouting for Lyra's death. A few alphas, the older ones who still remembered the true story of the coup, slowly lowered their weapons and knelt, heads bowed in reverence to the hybrid blood. The divide was no longer political. It was primal. Thorn saw his power slipping. Desperation sharpened his voice as he pointed at Lyra. "She carries both wolf and dragon, a creature that should never have existed. If we let her live, there will be no throne left, only ashes and dragon rule." He snatched a silver spear from the nearest guard and hurled it with deadly accuracy straight toward Lyra's heart. Time slowed. Draven moved faster than thought, stepping fully in front of her. The spear struck his armor and shattered, but the force drove him back a step. Pain flared across his face, not from the spear, but from the curse punishing him for the open protection. Lyra's wings snapped open instinctively, the spectral dragon above her roaring in fury. She placed a clawed hand on Draven's back, steadying him, her hybrid voice resonating with both command and quiet fury. Enough. The single word carried the weight of two bloodlines. Many in the chamber dropped fully to the floor. Even some of Thorn's loyalists hesitated, their wolves forcing submission. But Thorn refused to yield. His eyes burned with the knowledge that if Lyra lived, his crimes would be exposed and his stolen throne would crumble. He raised his hand to signal another attack. Draven straightened, blood on his lips from the strain of the curse, and looked at Lyra with tormented devotion. The choice had been made. Now the kingdom would bleed for it. The ritual chamber no longer belonged to fear. Lyra stood at its center in her hybrid form, wings half-furled, scales and moonlight silver fur catching the fractured light. The spectral dragon hovered above her like a living crown, its presence alone forcing most of the wolves in the chamber to their knees. Pain still throbbed through her body from the forced transformation, but she held it in check with quiet, iron will. She was no longer the forgotten girl dragged in chains. Draven remained at her side, his hand still pressed against her scaled shoulder. The curse was ravaging him. His dragonfire had dimmed to little more than embers. Yet he stood tall, a wall of black armor and unyielding resolve between her and the rest of the world. Thorn's face twisted with desperation. "This changes nothing," he snarled, voice rising in a final bid for control. "She is still the hybrid abomination. She will destroy the balance of the packs. If you stand with her, Draven, you stand against every true wolf in this kingdom." Some of his remaining loyalists raised their weapons, but their hands shook. The ancient instinct ran too deep. The hybrid queen had awakened, and their wolves recognized her. Lyra stepped forward slowly. Her clawed feet clicked against the broken stone. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The spectral dragon above her lowered its great head, silver gold eyes fixed on Thorn, with ancient judgment. "I did not return to burn this kingdom," she said, her voice a resonant blend of wolf and dragon. "I returned because it was never yours to rule. You murdered our parents. You branded a child and left her to die in the snow, and when the dragons saved me, you turned their mercy into a threat." She lifted one clawed hand. The moonlight responded, pooling around her like liquid silver. The exile brand on her shoulder flared once, then transformed fully into a glowing crown of intertwined wolf and dragon runes. "I offer the Pax a choice. Continue hiding behind lies and stolen power, or stand with the true bloodline and rebuild what was broken." Several alphas lowered their weapons completely. One by one, more wolves dropped to their bellies, submitting not out of fear, but out of recognition. The tide had turned. Thorn saw it happening. His grip tightened on his silver blade until his knuckles whitened. "You would choose a dragon whore over your own blood?" He spat at Draven. Draven's eyes flashed with lethal cold. He pulled Lyra closer, the public claim deliberate and final, even as the curse burned deeper into his veins, draining the last of his fire. His voice remained steady and commanding. "I choose the woman who survived what you tried to destroy," he said, loud enough for the entire chamber to hear. "I choose the true Queen of Ashthorn. And if any man here still stands against her, he stands against me." The words sealed the reversal. Thorn staggered as though struck. The last of his supporters began to back away, the reality of their position crashing down. The hybrid queen stood unbroken. The Dragon King had chosen her openly, despite the visible cost to his own power. Lyra turned to Draven. In her hybrid eyes there was no triumph, only quiet understanding of the fire he was sacrificing for her. She placed her clawed hand over his, where it rested on her shoulder, a small gesture of shared burden. The spectral dragon above them let out a low, resonant sound. Not a roar of conquest, but a declaration of protection. The court that had once come to watch her execution now knelt before her. Lyra Ashthorn was no longer the forgotten princess. She had become the queen they could no longer deny. Yet in the heavy silence that followed, both she and Draven knew the real battle was only beginning. Thorn still lived. The packs remained divided, and the curse consuming Draven's dragonfire grew stronger with every moment he stood beside her. Power had shifted, but peace remained a distant shadow. The great hall had become a battlefield of broken loyalty and awakening truth. Thorn's remaining forces charged with desperate fury, silver blades flashing under the fractured moonlight. They knew this was their final stand. If Lyra lived, Thorn's crimes would be laid bare, and his stolen throne would crumble into dust. Lyra stood at the center of the storm in her hybrid form, wings half spread, the spectral dragon roaring above her. Pain still tore through her body with every movement, but she channeled it into focus. She did not strike first. Instead, she raised one clawed hand and released a controlled wave of hybrid power, not to destroy, but to reveal. Silver-gold light exploded outward, flooding the hall with visions from the night of the coup. The court watched in horror as the truth unfolded. Thorn slipping poison into their father's wine, driving a silver dagger into their mother's back, pressing the burning brand into an 8-year-old girl's shoulder, while whispering that she must never return. Gasps and cries of betrayal filled the chamber. Thorn's face twisted with rage. "Lies!" he screamed, lunging forward with his silver blade aimed at Lyra's heart. "All of it lies!" Draven moved like living shadow. He intercepted the strike, his sword clashing against Thorn's with a ringing impact that echoed through the hall. The force of the collision sent shockwaves through his body. The curse inside him howled in agony, his dragonfire now reduced to dying embers. Yet he did not yield. "You took her from me once," Draven growled, voice rough with pain and centuries of restrained fury. "You will not touch her again." The two kings clashed wolf and dragon, ambition and ancient bond. Thorn fought with the desperation of a man who saw his empire collapsing. Draven fought with the quiet, devastating power of someone who had already chosen what he was willing to lose. Lyra felt the bond between them straining under the curse. Every second Draven protected her. The fire that defined him dimmed further. She could not watch him burn out completely. She stepped forward, wings flaring. The spectral dragon above her descended, merging with her shadow in a surge of raw power. Lyra raised both hands and unleashed a focused wave of hybrid energy directly at Thorn. Not to kill, but to bind. Silver-black chains of light erupted from the floor, wrapping around Thorn's limbs and forcing him to his knees. The visions intensified, showing every betrayal, every lie, every innocent life taken to secure his power. The last of Thorn's supporters dropped their weapons. Thorn struggled against the binding light, face contorted with hatred. "You are nothing but a monster wearing our father's face." Lyra walked slowly toward him, Draven at her side. Her hybrid voice resonated through the hall, calm yet carrying the weight of two bloodlines. "I am what you made me," she said, "a child thrown into the snow who refused to die. The dragons gave me shelter when my own blood tried to erase me. And now, I offer the Pax what you never could, truth." She looked down at her brother, the man who had tried to kill her twice. "I could end you here," she continued softly. "But I will not begin my reign with the same blood on my hands that stains yours. You will face the judgment of the Alphas and the court you betrayed." Draven stood beside her, breathing heavily, the last flickers of his dragonfire barely holding on. He looked at Lyra with raw, tormented devotion, the Dragon King who had risked everything, including his own life force, for the woman he had once carried through a blizzard. Thorn sagged in the binding chains, his empire shattered in front of the very court he had ruled through fear. The climax ended not with fire and death, but with the quiet, devastating collapse of a lie that had ruled for 17 years. Lyra turned to Draven. She could see the cost written across his face, the fading fire, the toll of the curse. Without hesitation, she placed her clawed hand over his heart, channeling a gentle thread of her hybrid power into him, not to save him completely, but to ease the burden he had carried for her. Their eyes met. The kingdom had been won, but the true battle, the one between love and the curse that sought to destroy it, was only beginning. Dawn broke over Ashthorn, keeping shades of silver and dragonfire. The great hall, once a place of judgment and betrayal, now stood transformed. Banners that had borne only the wolf crown now fluttered beside new sigils, a dragon wing wrapped protectively around a silver moon. The alphas of the packs knelt in formal acknowledgement as Lyra Ashthorn walked the long marble aisle, no longer in chains, but in robes of deep midnight and silver, her hybrid form withdrawn, but the power within her unmistakable. She had chosen not to remain in her transformed state. Not yet. The kingdom needed to see the woman as much as the queen. Draven walked at her side, tall and steady despite the visible toll the curse had taken. The fire in his eyes had dimmed to a quiet glow, but the way he looked at her, protective, possessive, and profoundly devoted, burned brighter than any flame he had ever possessed. Thorn had been taken away under guard to await the judgment of the full council. His reign of fear had ended not in glorious battle, but in the quiet collapse of lies exposed before those he had ruled. Lyra stopped before the obsidian throne. She did not sit. Not yet. She turned to face the assembled court, her storm-grey eyes steady and clear. The spectral shadow of the dragon lingered faintly behind her, a silent guardian that no longer needed to roar. "I was cast out as a child," she said, voice carrying through the hall with quiet strength, branded a traitor and left to die in the snow. The dragons did not see an enemy in me. They saw a child who refused to break. They raised me. They taught me that power is not taken through fear, but earned through survival and truth. She looked at the alphas, many of whom still bore the weight of divided loyalty. "I do not ask you to forget the past. I ask you to build a future that does not repeat it. The hybrid blood in my veins is not a curse. It is a bridge between two worlds that have bled for too long." A long silence followed. Then, one by one, the alphas rose and bowed their heads not in fear, but in genuine respect. The forgotten princess had returned not as a conqueror, but as a queen who had chosen mercy when vengeance would have been easier. Draven stepped forward. In front of the entire court, he took her hand, lacing their fingers together without hesitation. The curse still gnawed at him, a constant shadow in his blood. Yet he looked at her with a depth of emotion that needed no words. "You paid a terrible price for me," Lyra whispered, only for him to hear. Draven lifted her hand and pressed a slow kiss to her knuckles, his golden crimson eyes never leaving hers. "I would pay it again, every ember, every breath. You were worth the fire, Lyra. You always have been." The spectral dragon above them let out a low, resonant sound, not of conquest, but of quiet acceptance. The bond between them, though strained by the curse, had become something deeper than prophecy or blood. It had become choice. Later, as moonlight spilled across the balcony of the highest tower, Lyra stood with Draven overlooking the kingdom that was now hers to rule. The dragons circled lazily in the distant peaks, their roars carrying across the wind like ancient songs of loyalty. Draven pulled her against his chest, arms wrapping around her with a possessiveness that spoke of centuries of waiting. His voice was rough, tired, but filled with quiet devotion. "The curse may take my fire one day," he murmured against her hair. "But it will never take this. You are my mate, my queen, the one I chose when the world demanded I choose otherwise." Lyra turned in his arms, her storm-grey eyes meeting his. She placed her hand over his heart, letting a gentle thread of her hybrid power flow into him, not a cure, but a promise. "Then we will face whatever comes together," she said softly. "Wolf, and dragon, fire and moonlight. The kingdom will learn that some bonds are stronger than curses. Draven kissed her then, slow, deep, and full of every unsaid word between them. The kiss carried the weight of snow-covered mountains, of a child saved in the blizzard, and of a queen who had finally come home. Far below, the wolves of Ashthorn howled beneath the moon, not in mourning, but in recognition of a new era. The forgotten princess had returned. The Dragon King had chosen her, and the crown of ash would never be the same.